The man behind the myth narrator voice begins slow and steady, a tone of quiet reflection. He walks alone down a quiet street in Los Angeles. The sun has barely risen, and the world is still half asleep. His steps are calm, unhurried, like someone who carries time in his own hands. A man passes by him, eyes widen for a second, recognizing the face beneath the baseball cap and worn leather jacket. He wants to say something, maybe ask for a photo, but then stops himself. There's something about the way the man walks, something heavy and private. The man walks on. That man is Keanu Reeves. He is known to the world as the silent avenger, the relentless warrior, the man who fights without blinking. John Wick, Neo, 1,000 bullets and broken bones. But away from cameras, away from lights and action, Keanu is someone else entirely, and that story, his real story, is stranger, deeper, and more painful than anything Hollywood could write. The story begins not in a city of stars, but in a small, quiet apartment in Toronto, Canada. The walls were thin, the heater noisy, and the winters always too long. Keanu was just a boy then, skinny, quiet, often lost in his own thoughts. His mother, Patricia, was the center of his world. She worked long hours as a costume designer, always bringing fabric samples and dreams home in a torn tote bag. She had a soft voice, but a strong back. She never complained, even when life gave her every reason to. Keanu remembered how she used to hum songs while cooking instant noodles. She called them fancy dinner and would light a small candle to make it feel special. To Keanu, it always did. His father had left when Keanu was very young, too young to remember the man's voice, but old enough to carry the hole he left behind. Patricia never spoke ill of him. "Some people leave," she once said, "but that doesn't mean you're not enough." Keanu held on to those words like a raft in a storm. But school was hard. He wasn't good with words. The teachers called it dyslexia. They told Patricia he might struggle his whole life. She just nodded and said, "Then we'll struggle together." And that's exactly what they did. At night, while the other kids watched cartoons, Keanu read books aloud with his mother. Slow, stumbling, but steady. One word at a time. She never laughed when he messed up. She just smiled and said, "Again." That one word became their shared rhythm. Again. 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 Until the sentence made sense. By the time Keanu was 15, he had already moved through 4 different high schools. He didn't quite fit in anywhere. Too quiet. Too thoughtful. Other kids teased him. They called him slow. He never fought back. Just kept his head down, trying to stay invisible. But something inside him was building. Something no one could see yet. A fire. The first spark came from an old man named George. He was a janitor at one of Keanu's schools. He noticed the boy sitting alone during lunch every day. One afternoon, he sat beside him, opened his own sandwich, and said nothing. They ate in silence. Then George said, "People think quiet means weak, but sometimes it just means you're listening." That line changed everything. Keanu started listening more, to the wind, to people's voices, to the sound of his own footsteps. The world was no longer loud and confusing. It was a story waiting to be heard, and he wanted to hear all of it. He began acting almost by accident. A friend dragged him into a school play. He had only one line, but when he stepped on stage, something shifted. It wasn't about being seen. It was about becoming someone else, slipping into another skin, leaving behind the heavy things he couldn't carry. He felt free, but the freedom didn't last. One night after a late rehearsal, Keanu came home to find his mother sitting at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. She had lost her job. The company had moved to New York without her. There were no savings, no backup plan, just bills and an old car that wouldn't start in the cold. Keanu sat beside her, not saying a word. Then he stood up and did the only thing he knew how to do. He got a job, first as a floor sweeper in a local theater, then as a stagehand, then as an extra. Always working, always learning. Not for fame, just for the next meal. For his mother. But something about his presence, his stillness, caught people's attention. Directors started to notice. Casting calls turned into callbacks. A small role in a commercial, a guest spot in a TV show. The roles grew, and so did his strength. When he landed his first real movie role, he walked home with the news burning in his chest. He opened the door, dropped his bag and said, "Mom, we're going to be okay." She cried for a long time that night, not because of the money, but because of the boy he had become. But success doesn't come without shadows. Keanu stepped into the world of Hollywood. He saw how quickly things could change. Friends became strangers. Kindness was rare. Respect was often a mask for selfishness. But Keanu kept his quiet dignity. He didn't party. He didn't chase headlines. He just worked, and then went home. Then came the accident. His best friend, River Phoenix, died outside a club on Sunset Boulevard. Overdose. Senseless. Sudden. Keanu didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he whispered to his mother. He was like a brother. From that day on, something in him broke, and something else took its place. A deep, endless well of sorrow. But he never let it turn to bitterness. Instead, he turned to silence and to kindness. He gave away most of his earnings to the crew on set. Bought motorcycles for stuntmen. Visited children's hospitals without cameras. Refused luxury trailers. Rode the subway like everyone else. People said he was strange. But they didn't know what he had lost. They didn't know about Jennifer. His great love. The woman who made him laugh again. Who saw past the actor and into the man. They were going to have a child. They had picked out names. Painted the nursery. Then one cold morning, the baby was gone. Stillborn. 1 week before the due date, they held each other and cried until they couldn't breathe. And 5 months later, Jennifer died in a car crash. People didn't see Keanu for weeks. They thought he had left town, but he hadn't. He was walking. Through streets. Through grief. Through the kind of silence that never ends. And yet, he came back. To work. To life. Not because he wanted to, but because someone had to keep going. Someone had to make sure his mother never saw him give up. Someone had to carry the memory of love forward, and that someone was still just her little boy. The screen fades to black, soft piano begins to play, and then a new voice enters, deep and heavy. But pain wasn't done with him yet. Not by a long shot. A suitcase full of silence, the year was fading. December hung in the air like an old coat, worn, heavy, and smelling of memories. Keanu stood at the edge of a quiet lake just outside Vancouver. No cameras, no phones, no people. Just the sound of wind moving across the frozen surface and the dull ache that lived behind his eyes. It had been almost a year since Jennifer's accident. Some days he remembered every detail, the rain, the call, the drive to the hospital, and some days it all disappeared into a fog so thick he could barely move. The grief had changed shape. It no longer screamed. Now it just sat with him, silent, familiar. Like an old friend who didn't need to speak to be understood. Hollywood had moved on, of course. The world always does. New stars rose, headlines, shifted, and time, ruthless as ever, kept walking forward. But Keanu didn't move with it. Not fully. He still acted, still showed up on set, still gave everything to the roles they handed him. But something was missing behind his eyes. Directors saw it. They called it depth. They said he had the kind of sadness you couldn't fake. But it wasn't acting. It was just him. He rented a small place far from Los Angeles. No mansion, no pool, no gate. Just a modest home with too many windows and a leaky faucet. The kind of house where you could hear your own thoughts whether you wanted to or not. He liked it that way. He cooked simple meals. He read old books. Sometimes he stared at the same wall for hours, remembering the way Jennifer used to sing to herself while folding laundry. Sometimes he heard her voice. It didn't scare him. He welcomed it. But one night changed everything. It started with a knock. Soft one. Hesitant. Like someone wasn't sure they were allowed to be there. Keanu opened the door and found a young woman standing there, soaked in rain, clutching something tightly against her chest. She looked no older than 20. Her face was pale, her clothes thin, and her eyes held the same haunted weight he saw in his own reflection. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know where else to go." Keanu didn't recognize her. Not at first, but when she stepped into the light, he saw it, her eyes. They were the same shape as Jennifer's. "My name is Elena," she said. "Jennifer was my sister." He felt the room spin slightly. He hadn't known Jennifer had a sister. She had mentioned a difficult family, a childhood filled with chaos and running, but she rarely spoke of it. Now, standing in his living room, was a living piece of the past he thought he had buried. Elena handed him a suitcase. Old, scratched, with a broken zipper on the side. She didn't say what was inside. She just said, "She left it for you, but I couldn't find you until now." Keanu placed the suitcase on the table but didn't open it. Not right away. They sat in silence for a long time. Elena sipped tea with both hands like it was the only warmth she'd known in weeks. She didn't ask for money. She didn't want anything. She just wanted to tell him stories. About Jennifer, as a little girl, about how she used to protect her from their father, about how she once saved up her lunch money just to buy Elena a birthday cupcake. "She loved you," Elena said, "more than anyone." Keanu listened, eyes fixed on the steam rising from his cup. It was strange, how a stranger could walk into your life and remind you who you used to be. After Elena fell asleep on the couch, he finally opened the suitcase. Inside were letters, dozens of them, handwritten, some tear-stained, all addressed. To him, she had written them during her pregnancy. Some were hopeful, others were scared. All of them were full of love. And at the very bottom, folded beneath a yellowed sonogram photo, was a final letter, the last one. He read it twice before dawn. When the sun rose, something inside him did too. He called a friend in New York, a director he trusted. He said, "I want to do something different, something real." The director hesitated. "What do you mean?" Keanu said. "No guns, no violence, just something honest." The project that followed was small, barely had a budget. It wasn't what studios wanted, but Keanu didn't care. He paid for most of it himself. It was a story about grief, about love that doesn't end just because life does, about a man who learns to speak again not with words, but with silence. The film didn't break records. It didn't go viral, but it touched people. Deeply. Letters poured in from all over the world, people who had lost children, partners, siblings. They wrote to say, "Thank you for showing how pain feels without making it look dramatic." Keanu read every single one, and something began to shift. Not all at once, but little by little, the numbness faded. He began to smile again, not the hollow smile for cameras, but the quiet one that comes from remembering someone's laugh. He started taking long walks through cities he didn't know, watching people, helping strangers. Once, he paid for an old woman's groceries without saying a word. Another time, he spent hours helping a man push his broken car out of traffic. Not because anyone was watching, but because it felt good to do something kind. One day, a child ran up to him in a bookstore. The boy handed him a crumpled drawing, a stick figure holding a heart. "You're my hero," he said. Keanu knelt down, looked the boy in the eye, and said, "I'm just a guy, trying to be good, but life, as always, doesn't pause when things feel right." And one night, as he sat reading on his porch, a phone buzzed on the table beside him. A number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. But something told him to. "Mr. Reeves," the voice said, "we need to talk. It's about your father." The line went quiet. His heart didn't race. It stopped. For the first time in decades, the ghost he had buried long ago was calling back, and it wasn't done with him yet. The voice through the static, the silence after the phone call, was louder than any scream. Keanu sat still, his thumb hovering above the end button, though the call had already dropped. The words echoed, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. His father. A word that hadn't left his lips in over 30 years. Not in interviews, not with friends, not even with his mother. The man had vanished like a shadow down a hallway, leaving behind no note, no apology, no footprints. And now, suddenly, the past had a voice again. The next morning, he didn't tell Elena. She had left early, heading back to San Francisco, where she was trying to rebuild a life of her own. Before leaving, she hugged him tightly, like family does when they don't know if they'll ever see each other again. He held her longer than expected, not because he was afraid to let her go, but because, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in the world. Keanu drove that day. Nowhere in particular, just drove. The kind of driving where you don't use GPS, don't care where you end up, just let the road bleed out the noise inside. The memory of his father was a foggy picture, scattered and unreliable, a loud voice, hands that smelled like oil and cigarettes, the sound of an old record spinning too slow, and then nothing. Like he had never existed at all. That night, he found himself in a diner off Route 101, the kind with flickering neon lights and coffee that tasted like regret. An older man sat across from him at the counter, eating eggs with his bare hands, talking to no one in particular. Keanu listened, not to the words, but the spaces between them. Sometimes broken people speak in code. He understood that language. Now, the call came again the next night, same voice, calm, clipped. "We didn't mean to scare you," the man said, "but your father's in a hospital. He's dying, and he asked for you." Keanu didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just breathed. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th, he packed a single bag, left his phone behind, and boarded a train heading south. The hospital was small. Rural, the kind of place where time moved slower and nurses wore tired smiles. A man in a wrinkled suit met him at the entrance. "Thank you for coming," he said. "He hasn't spoken much, just keeps asking for the boy." Keanu wanted to correct him, wanted to say he wasn't a boy anymore, but maybe part of him still was. He walked through the hallway like he was entering a museum of someone else's pain. Every room whispered stories he wasn't ready to hear. And then, room 19. The door was open, but he knocked anyway. The man in the bed was smaller than he remembered. Older, of course, but not just in years. He looked like someone who had run out of reasons to fight. Tubes in his nose, machines breathing for him. But when he opened his eyes, there was no confusion. He said only one word. "Son." Keanu didn't speak. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't sure what language to use with ghosts. His father tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. Instead, he motioned to a small wooden box on the table beside him. "Open it," he rasped. Inside were clippings, photos, old movie tickets, printed interviews, headlines. Keanu Reeves, the actor with a broken heart. Keanu Reeves gives away his salary again. Keanu Reeves mourns quietly, beautifully. His father had kept everything. "I watched," he whispered. "Always watched." Keanu stared at the box, unsure if it was proof of love or a shrine built out of guilt. The man in the bed reached out. His hand shook as it hovered in the air, waiting. Keanu took it, not because he forgave him, but because the weight of letting go was easier than carrying silence. They spoke for hours, though most of it wasn't speech. It was glances, nods, two men trying to rewind time with nothing but looks. The old man cried, not like the movies, not loud, just slow tears slipping down his face like years falling off his soul. And then, as dawn approached, he whispered something that cracked the world open. I left because I thought I was protecting you. Keanu didn't understand. His father closed his eyes. You were always too good. I didn't want you to grow up seeing what I was. He didn't explain further. The machines beeped softer now. A nurse stepped in and asked Keanu to leave. He didn't. He stayed until the last breath. And for the first time in 3 decades, he said the word he had buried long ago. Dad. After the funeral, Keanu didn't return to Los Angeles. He went to Hawaii, not for vacation, not to hide, but to find a man named Mika, a name his father had whispered before the end. The island air was warm and clean, but Keanu felt the storm, building beneath his skin. Mika wasn't just a name. He was something more, something secret. And when he found him, working in a repair shop on the edge of Honolulu, Keanu realized the next chapter wasn't going to be easier. Mika turned, froze, and said, I knew you'd come. The brother in the shadows, the wind smelled different on the island. Softer, like it didn't carry the same weight as the air in Los Angeles. Like it hadn't passed through broken cities and hotel lobbies and red carpets. Keanu walked slowly, down the narrow dirt path behind the shop, his shoes crunching gravel with a quiet rhythm. Mika had told him to wait. Give me 5 minutes. But Keanu didn't want to sit still. Not now. Not after hearing the word brother spoken aloud for the first time in his life. The repair shop had been quiet when he entered. Clean. Organized. Not what he expected from someone who'd been hidden from him for over 4 decades. Mecca was tall, lean, same deep eyes. Not a copy, but an echo. He had grease under his nails and a voice that didn't seem surprised when he saw Keanu walk through the door. He had nodded once, then simply said, I knew you'd come. And now they sat, finally, beneath a worn umbrella behind the shop, the ocean sighing in the distance. Mika lit a cigarette, offered one to Keanu, who shook his head. You don't smoke? Mika asked, more curiosity than judgment. I used to, Keanu said quietly. Not anymore. Mika leaned back in his chair. Figured you'd quit. Famous people don't get to keep vices. Keanu didn't answer. He just looked at the man in front of him, trying to piece together how 2 lives, shaped by the same blood, had grown in opposite directions, one in silence, the other in shadow. You knew about me, Keanu said. Not a question. Just a weight he finally put on the table. Mika nodded. Since I was a kid. Dad kept your pictures, had this old shoebox under his bed. Said you were the one good thing he'd ever done. Keanu looked away. You hate him? Mika asked. Keanu shook his head slowly. I did. But now, I think I just don't know how to feel. They sat with that truth for a while, letting it settle between them like dust. Mika told stories. Not dramatic ones. Simple ones. Fishing with their father, working on bikes. Nights spent listening to old jazz records while he drank in silence. He wasn't a good man, Mika said, but he wasn't evil. Just broken. Keanu listened. Part of him wanted to ask why no one told him. Why his mother never mentioned a second son, a second life built alongside his own. But deeper than the questions was something else. Relief. Relief that he hadn't been as alone as he thought, even if the truth had taken years to reach him. As the sky darkened and the ocean turned black, Mika stood and pulled something from his back pocket. A photograph, crumpled and sun-faded. 2. Showed 2 boys, maybe 5 and 7, standing beside a rusted truck. One of them had a toy gun. The other had a wrench, he used to say. Mika whispered. If they ever meet, they'll destroy each other or save each other. Keanu took the photo and stared at it for a long time. Which one are you hoping for? He asked. Mika didn't smile. Depends on which version of you walked through that door. They spent the next few days together. No deep conversations, no dramatic revelations, just 2 men doing normal things, fixing old engines, watching rain fall, sharing meals that tasted better than they had any right to. The kind of living that made space for healing without demanding it. But something changed on the 3rd night. They were sitting in Mika's small living room, an old blues record playing on low, when Mika got quiet. His fingers drummed on the armrest, eyes flicking toward the door like something was coming. There's something else, he said finally. Something you need to know. Keanu leaned forward. Mika took a breath. You ever wonder why Mom never talked about Dad? Why? She never said a word about me? Keanu didn't answer. She wasn't keeping us from you, Mika said. She was protecting you. The room went still. Mika stood, walked to a small safe under the bookshelf, and pulled out a folder thick with papers. Old documents. Sealed. Letters. One photo, black and white, of a woman with bruises that hadn't yet faded. He wasn't always the way you remember him, Mika said softly. He changed. After the divorce. After you left with your mom. He broke. The air inside the room got colder. I stayed, Mika continued, because I didn't have a choice. And Mom, your mom, she kept you away. Not out of hate, but love. She didn't want you to know what he'd become. Keanu stared at the folder but didn't reach for it. Mika placed a hand on his shoulder. You were the lucky one, brother. Outside, a car passed. Its headlights briefly lit the room, like a camera flash catching them mid-confession. Keanu stood and walked out into the night. The stars above were so bright it almost hurt to look at them. For years he had carried pain like armor. But this was different. This was grief wrapped in gratitude. Sorrow tangled with love. It didn't burn. It ached. The next morning, he packed his things. Mika didn't ask why. He just handed Keanu the folder and said, Do what you need to do. At the airport, Keanu sat by the window, the folder unopened on his lap. He watched the runway lights flicker as the sky bled pink and orange. He didn't know where the next stop would lead, but somewhere in those pages, the last pieces of the story waited. Not of his father, not of his brother, but of himself. Letters from the quiet airplanes don't really take you anywhere. Not when your mind's still stuck in the past. Keanu sat in his seat, thousands of feet above the ground, watching clouds drift like forgotten memories. The folder Mika gave him lay closed across his lap. He hadn't opened it. Not on the flight, not in the taxi, not even when he returned home. It stayed there on the kitchen table like a sleeping animal, breathing through the silence of the room. He made coffee, washed a dish, stood in the hallway staring at a light that flickered every 3rd second. But the folder remained untouched. On the 3rd night back, something shifted. A storm outside, wind scraping against the window like fingers trying to get in. Keanu sat in the dark, barefoot, one hand resting on the folder, the other gripping a cup of tea gone cold. He didn't light a candle, didn't turn on a lamp. He just waited for whatever was inside that folder to decide it was time. It opened slowly. First were letters, postmarked from cities he'd never been to, all addressed to someone named Claire, his mother. Some signed with initials, others with just one word. He. They weren't love letters. They were confessions. His father had written them during the years he vanished. Some were scribbled in desperation, others calm, almost poetic. They spoke of regret, of fear, of watching his own son rise in the world, larger than he ever dreamed, while he himself drifted further into the cracks. One letter read, "I saw him in a movie today. He looked strong, like someone who escaped the blood in his name." Beneath the letters were reports, medical, psychiatric, incidents, a mugshot, his father's face, bruised and blurred, staring back like a ghost not ready to be remembered. And then, photos. One in particular caught Keanu's breath, a picture of him at 12, holding his mother's hand outside their old apartment in Benaidea, Toronto. He hadn't known it was taken. He hadn't known someone was watching from across the street. The photo had a note on the back. "You were always the reason I stayed away." He felt like something inside him was splitting, not breaking, not falling apart, but opening. Like the truth wasn't something sharp, it was just heavy. The last item was a small cassette tape wrapped in a napkin, written on it in smudged ink. "For when he's ready." Keanu didn't own a cassette player, but he found one the next morning in a thrift store across town. Dusty, half working, but the tape fit. He pressed play, sat on the floor, and let the past speak. His father's voice came through like gravel underwater. Slow, deliberate, not rehearsed. Raw. "You probably hate me," the voice said. "Maybe you should. But if you're listening to this, then you've grown into the kind of man your mother always believed you'd be." There was a pause. "They told me not to record this, said it would stir things that should stay buried. But I don't believe in burying truth. Not anymore." Keanu closed his eyes. The voice filled the room. "I wasn't a good man. I hurt people. I failed people. I didn't know how to carry love without dropping it. But you were different. Even as a baby, you had this calm in you. Like you already knew life would be loud and ugly, so you stayed soft. And I couldn't let myself infect that." Keanu let the words settle, not just in his ears, in his bones. "So I disappeared." The voice continued, "and I've regretted it every day since." The tape ended there. No, goodbye, just static. He sat there until the sun rose, light creeping into the room like forgiveness that didn't ask for permission. The next day, he did something he hadn't done in years. He called his mother. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was older, softer, tired in the way people get when they've carried too many untold truths. "Hi, Mom," he said. There was a pause. Then, "Hello, baby." They spoke for hours. Not about the folder, not about the tape. Just life. Flowers she was growing. The neighbor's noisy dog. The way she still lit a candle during dinner, even when eating alone. And slowly, the conversation curved toward memory, she confessed gently, carefully. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "But I didn't know how to break your heart twice." Keanu didn't cry. He just said, "You didn't break anything. You saved me," and she did. But saving someone often leaves scars you carry in silence. After they hung up, he sat with the cassette again. Not to listen, just to hold it. Because sometimes proof of love is messy, broken, incomplete, but still sacred. Days passed. Then, a letter arrived. Not mailed, hand-delivered, no return address, no name. Inside was a single note. He wasn't the only one watching, and below it, a photograph, blurry, a man in a black coat, following Keanu down the street. Not from years ago, from last week. The man in the photograph. The human heart isn't built for constant mystery. Even the strongest hearts grow tired of not knowing, of waiting for answers that never fully arrive. Keanu stared at the photograph in his hand, his fingers trembling. Just slightly. Not from fear, but from a deeper sensation that didn't yet have a name. The picture was recent. Too recent. He could tell by the jacket he wore, the one he had only pulled from his closet last week. And the street. It was his. The corner outside the bookstore where he often stood when he needed to feel the rhythm of life around him. The man in the black coat wasn't far behind in the photo, blurred but undeniable. Whoever had taken this had been close. Deliberate. For a few hours, Keanu did nothing. He just sat. In the same room where he had listened to his father's voice, on the cassette. Where he had opened the folder that had sliced through years of silence like a blade. He placed the new letter beside the old ones, like it belonged there. Like it was part of the same breathless sentence he hadn't finished reading yet. Then he stood, put on the same jacket, and walked, not away, toward. The bookstore was still open, its lights warm and yellow, casting long reflections on the damp sidewalk. But Keanu didn't go inside. He stood outside under the same flickering street lamp from the photo. For a moment, he just existed there. Breathing. Listening. Not chasing, not fleeing. And then, he saw him, across the street, still in the black coat. The man wasn't hiding. He stepped forward. Middle-aged, rough hands. A face that had been through years, not just time. Eyes that didn't flinch. Keanu didn't move. The man walked slowly across the street until they were only a few feet apart. No one else around. The city somehow paused. "You're not surprised," the man said. Keanu shook his head. "I never am anymore." "You know who I am?" "No," Keanu answered. "But I know what you feel like." The man reached into his coat. Not a gun, just a photograph. He handed it to Keanu without a word. It was a picture of Keanu, age 16, standing beside a motorcycle. Not his. He hadn't owned one yet, but he remembered that day. Someone had let him sit on it. For a moment he had felt like someone else, stronger, bolder, freer. "I took that," the man said. "Years ago." Keanu finally looked him in the eyes. "Why?" The man's voice cracked a little. "Because I never got to be your uncle." Keanu blinked. The man exhaled. "I'm Paul, your father's brother." Another piece of the puzzle. Another shadow turned to flesh. "I tried to find you after he left. I wrote letters. But your mother. She didn't want anyone near you who reminded her of him. And maybe she was right." Keanu didn't speak. He wasn't sure if he had any words left that hadn't already been used. Paul looked down. "He told me near the end. Told me you forgave him. I couldn't believe it." "I didn't forgive," Keanu said quietly. "Not exactly. I just stopped needing to be angry." Paul nodded slowly. "I've spent most of my life watching from behind corners. I didn't think I deserved to know you. But then I saw the way you carried him, even after everything. And I thought, maybe it's not too late." Keanu looked at the photograph. Again. Not of him now, but the boy he had been. The one who didn't know what he'd survive. Who didn't yet know grief, or fame, or loss, or kindness, disguised as strangers. "You came here just to say that?" Keanu asked. "No," Paul said. "I came to give you this." He handed over a small notebook, leather-bound. Old Keanu opened it. Inside, his father's handwriting, pages and pages of reflections, journal entries, drawings, dates circled in. Read. All the times he saw Keanu in public but didn't approach, all the thoughts he never said, all the apologies he didn't know how to give. At the back of the notebook, one page stood alone. It read, "I never became the man I hoped." But maybe he did. Maybe that's enough. Keanu closed the book. For a long moment, neither man said anything. Then, Keanu stepped forward and did something unexpected. He hugged him, not tightly, not desperately, but sincerely. It didn't erase anything. It didn't change the past, but it opened something. Later that night, Keanu returned home and sat at his piano, the one he rarely touched anymore. He played one note, then another, then a melody, simple and soft, like rain against a window. And in that moment, he realized something. Grief doesn't end. It transforms. Pain doesn't leave. It learns to sit quietly in the corner of your joy. Family isn't always who stays. Sometimes it's who comes back, even if late, and love, real love, is not in the endings. It's in the choosing to try again, to forgive without forgetting, to walk into the past and come out with something worth carrying. The camera would never capture this version of him. No gun in his hand, no fight choreography, no legend behind his name, just a man, in a quiet room, playing a melody no one would ever hear except his mother, because to her, he was still just her little boy, and that was always enough.